Life can only be understood backwards, but we have to live it forwards.
Say cheese, Gracie.
Snails never go back over their trail.
As soon as I'm old enough and got money, I'm coming to get you.
Adam, start with telling us a little bit about your fascination or interest in snails. Was that something that you were interested in before making this film, or that you sort of look for when thinking about Grace and her interests?
Well, actually, the original draft of the script was Memoir of a ladybug. Then that film Ladybird came out with Greta Gerwig, and I thought I'll have to find another creature, another animal. And so I did think about pigs and ducks and frogs and those sorts of collections that people have, but none of them really had that metaphorical sort of nature and symbolic nature I was after. And what was the clincher for snails was I remembered what my parents used to say, to not touch a snail's antennas because it's cruel, and the snail would always retract into its shell. And I thought that was a beautiful metaphor for what Grace is doing her whole life, is retracting from the world and using her shell as a shield. And I also loved the swirl on a snail's shell as a motif, and I thought that'd be nice sort of little motif to go throughout the film, and that in itself is symbolic of life going full circle. And so there's lovely little tie-ins. And then I discovered that snails can't reverse, they can only go forward. They can go round in circles, but they can't go backwards. And then that linked really nicely to my favourite quote, which is life can only be understood backwards, but we have to live it forwards, which is not my quote, it's by Søren Kierkegaard, the philosopher. So there's all these little lovely tie-ins. So snails it was, yeah.
Jackie, what was your first thought when they approached you about a story of about a woman who's in love with snails?
Well, I was offered the job, and without even reading the script, I said yes, because it's Adam Elliot, and I mean, he is a legend back home in Australia. I've loved everything he's done, and I just said yeah. And then I read the script, and it was so beautiful. So yeah, it was sight unseen.
Did you relate at all to Pinky's, your character, her philosophy, and she becomes a sort of like guru guide for Grace's life?
Well, I'll own to being slightly eccentric and to being relentlessly cheerful. I've never slept with John Denver or played, what was it, ping pong? Ping pong with Fidel Castro. But yeah, I did identify with her. And Adam told me that he wrote her thinking about me.
Yeah, well, growing up watching Jacki in all these classic Australian films, way back to Picnic at Hanging Rock by Peter Weir, there's something about Jacki's humour, but also she can do vulnerability. She's our Meryl Streep. Oh. So when I started writing the script, I had Jacki's voice in my head. It's a bit creepy, but yeah, I had Jacki in my head the whole time. Similarly with Sarah Snook, I rewatched a lot of Sarah's films and shut my eyes. And as you know, it's very difficult to get that perfect voice for the animation. Sometimes they don't marry, but in Pinky's case, Jacki's voice just inhabited our clay blobs and brought Pinky to life.
Gracie is a hoarder, which means she has lots of items with snails on them. Tell us about creating this, thousands of items for her house.
Well, it was a real challenge because our budget was low, as are typical Australian films, and we wanted to make the film entirely in camera. We wanted every prop, set and character to be a real, tangible, tactile object. We didn't want to do any CGI effects. Just the snails alone, I think there's between 5,000 and 7,000 little snails that we made. There were days I wished I'd written a film about a minimalist, because it would have been a lot quicker. But yeah, snails it was.
I love the color palette of the film is very specific. It's sort of like brownish, yellowish. Tell us about sort of that specificity in the color throughout the film.
Well, originally the film was going to be black and white, but one of our investors said, no way. So I thought, all right, well, what about brown? And they said, oh, brown's a bit dull. And I said, well, I'm trying to represent the 70s. And from my memory, the 70s were very brown. Everyone painted their houses mission brown and beige. And I thought it was also really, it really had a great simpatico with Grace's mental state too, and each of the three cities, Melbourne, Perth and Canberra, I made them have different shades of brown. So Melbourne was a blacky brown, Perth was a dark mission brown, and Canberra was beige and vanilla, and to represent the blandness of Canberra. For those who haven't been to Canberra, it's still the same. Actually, we premiered the film there just before we came overseas, and all my cousins live in Canberra and they're still talking to me. And we went to the screening of the film. We went out afterwards to have a drink and there was nothing open. We ended up having a glass of water in my hotel foyer. So yeah, Canberra hasn't changed.
Jacki, would you say that the film feels authentically Australian in its look and...
Oh, yes, it feels very Australian. Yes, yes, not just the way people are speaking, but Sydney and Melbourne are very sophisticated cities of about 5 million people. We've got everything from the very grand to the very humble. But yeah, there was something beautifully touching about, I love how Adam's script gives dignity to people who are so unfortunate in life. He gives them dignity and humanity, and it makes you, he's a philosopher really, and it makes you realise there but for the grace of someone could be me. I love that. It's such a universal theme.
Adam, you mentioned that there's no CGI in this film, and we've talked previously, and you mentioned that even the skies are hand-painted, which I think is marvelous. Was it always the idea to even the skies happen that way?
Yes, actually, we certainly use green screen and we do clean-up in post-production. We remove stuff, but we don't add anything digital. So I really wanted even the skies to be hand-painted. And we had a wonderful Colombian artist who'd migrated to Australia, who had come from a very poor background in Colombia and really wanted an opportunity in Australia to work on a film. And he can sculpt, he can paint, and he did all the skies in 1 week. He put the rest of our artists to shame. He just got all these giant canvases and whipped up all these gorgeous clouds. And I'm so glad we went down that path because, again, we wanted to make sure the film was authentic to traditional stop motion. And that's also because, there's so much fear of AI at the moment as well. And I think we're in a period where, the pendulum is sort of swinging back away from so much CGI and digital technology, and it's the same reason why in lockdown everyone started knitting and making their own bread, and art supply stores were booming because there was something that forced us all go back to doing things by hand. And I think stop motion in general is in really good shape. The fact that Wes Anderson and Guillermo del Toro are all making stop motion films means the art form is alive and well, because when I graduated from film school in 1996, I was told that I was pursuing a dying art form. And even cinema itself was dying. I remember when the Laserdisc came out, it was like, oh, that's the end of cinema, the Laserdisc. Well, who won that battle,
Since Grace is here with us, tell us about designing her. What were you sort of imagining when you first conceived of Grace?
Well, all my characters are blobs, really. We have 2 words to describe my aesthetic, and that is chunky wonky. So we don't want things to look refined. I really wanted to celebrate the lumps and bumps, not just aesthetically, but also that's what the characters' psyches are like too. I wanted there to be a simpatico between the look and also the characters' personalities. And we strove for asymmetry, so every prop set and character had to look slightly off kilter, and every prop had to look like it had been dropped on the ground or roughed up a bit, and we really wanted to celebrate the fingerprints, the brush strokes. We banned airbrushing, everything was hand painted with a brush, and we tried to reduce the film to 4 basic ingredients: paper, clay, wire and paint. So it had a very sort of minimalist aesthetic and look. And we wanted it to be obvious that this was handcrafted. I think a lot of stop motion is getting a little bit too slick, you know, because now we have 3D printers and all this other wonderful, wonderful tools, but I think they can be overused. So we wanted to get back to basics, I suppose. And also too, because of our budget, you know, we really couldn't afford walking, which is why Grace doesn't have any legs. So we did the Muppet technique, you know, like that. And also we focused on the script because we knew that, you know, if we didn't get the story right, then it was just going to be a waste of time. And I've always said that, you know, obviously script is king, but in our instance, it really was crucial that the script and the story was as polished as possible. So I spent 3 years writing. I did 16 drafts of the script, and it was almost sad to stop writing, but I knew I had to finally make the film.
Jacki, what instruction did Adam give you to play Pinky? What was sort of his direction when you guys were recording the voice?
Well, I was keen to try any kind of voice he wanted, and because I do a lot of character voices, and he said, "No, I just want you." I thought it's a bit dull. Yeah, that's mostly. He was wonderful to work for because everything I did, he said, "That's perfect." A few years ago, my husband and I did one, in my opinion, the greatest American play ever written, Death of a Salesman. And I was Linda, and the final scene when she's kneeling at the grave, and we did many, many, many performances. And when you're doing something so sad as that, you must try and avoid feeling sorry for yourself, because if you feel sorry for yourself, you're less likely to get your audience to feel sorry. You've got to be as brave and as practical as possible in order to engender empathy. And I think that's a similar thing to that last monologue that Pinky does. She's very matter of fact, even though it's very tender. I'm going to cry. Does that make sense?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. That's how you did it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacki. Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming out. Thank you.